The galaxy had a problem with humans, and the problem was this. They kept doing things that shouldn't work, and then those things worked anyway, and nobody could explain why. It was like watching someone juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle across a tightrope, except the chainsaws were on fire, the unicycle was missing a wheel, and the tightrope was made of dental floss. And somehow, impossibly, they'd make it to the other side and ask what the big deal was. Cassidy was a perfect example of this phenomenon. She worked as a wildlife behavioral specialist, which sounded impressive until you realized it meant she spent her days watching apex predators try to murder enrichment toys while she scribbled notes about their social dynamics and hunting development patterns. Most species who did this job had the common sense to observe from a different postal code. Humans, as usual, preferred to press their noses against the glass and make cooing noises. Frontier's Edge was where Cassidy had been stationed for the past 6 months, a research facility orbiting a gas giant in the Andros system that looked like someone had tie-dyed a planet purple and forgotten about it. The station itself was a collaborative effort between multiple species, which meant it had the aesthetic charm of a storage container and the structural integrity of a ship held together by hope and maintenance requests that nobody had gotten around to filing yet. What made Frontier's Edge special, and by special, we mean the kind of posting that made insurance adjusters weep, was its primary research focus, the Rylth. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Rylth, allow me to paint you a picture. Take a tiger, make it the size of a small transport vehicle, give it 6 limbs instead of 4, add reptilian scales that could deflect small arms fire, throw in retractable claws that made monomolecular blades look quaint, and then give the whole package an attitude that screamed, "I am the nightmare that nightmares have nightmares about." That was a Rylth on a good day. On a bad day? Well, there was a reason 3 entire star systems had formal treaties that basically amounted to, "Please don't make the Rylth angry. We like our infrastructure unshredded." The Rylth were protected by more galactic legislation than most sentient rights declarations. The rules were simple. Leave them alone. Respect their territory. Fund their conservation programs, and this part was in bold, underlined, and possibly written in the blood of the last idiot who'd ignored it. Do not, under any circumstances, interfere with their cubs. Rylth took parenting very seriously. Interfering with their young was considered grounds for everything from diplomatic sanctions to having your homeworld marked as that place we should probably avoid forever. So naturally, Cassidy's entire job was studying those very same cubs. She did this from behind observation glass, thankfully. The glass was 14 centimeters thick, rated to withstand a Rylth matriarch's full-strength charge, and had been tested extensively after what the station's incident reports mysteriously referred to as the human-related safety re-evaluation of 22-93. The station's insurance carrier had opinions about humans and dangerous animals, and those opinions were expensive. Dr. Felmoss was Cassidy's supervisor, a quilanthan who looked like someone had taken a praying mantis, sent it to graduate school, and given it crippling anxiety as a graduation present. His species had compound eyes that could track multiple things at once, an evolutionary advantage he used primarily to keep tabs on what his human charge was doing at any given moment. "Morning, Doc," Cassidy called out as she entered the observation deck, coffee in hand. Human coffee, specifically, which smelled like burnt ambition and tasted like regret. Most species found it toxic. Humans chugged it by the liter. Dr. Felmoss's antennae twitched in what Cassidy had learned to recognize as resigned acknowledgement. "You are 3 minutes late to your shift." I prefer to think of it as fashionably delayed. That is not how shift schedules work. And yet, here I am, fashionably present. The Quilanthan made a clicking sound that the translator didn't bother rendering, probably because it was the verbal equivalent of a sigh mixed with acceptance of fate. The juvenile subjects have been active since dawn cycle. Subject J3 attempted to climb the maintenance platform again. Scritch, Cassidy corrected automatically. The proper designation is Subject J3. The proper designation is boring. His name is Scritch. This was an old argument, one they had at least twice a week. Cassidy had nicknamed all three cubs within her first month on station: Scritch, Patches, and Tiny. The fact that Tiny was actually the largest of the three cubs only made the name better, in her opinion. Dr. Felmoss maintained that proper scientific documentation required proper designations. Cassidy maintained that life was too short to call a 6-month-old apex predator Subject J3 when he made adorable chirping sounds when confused. The observation deck stretched along one entire wall of the biodome section, offering a panoramic view of the Ralth juvenile habitat. The habitat itself was massive, taking up enough space to house a small apartment complex, designed to mimic the cub's natural environment. Rocky outcroppings jutted from carefully cultivated alien vegetation, multiple elevation levels provided climbing opportunities, and, scattered throughout, were enrichment items that the cubs delighted in destroying. Currently, all three cubs were engaged in what Cassidy's notes called coordinated play behavior, and what was actually a three-way wrestling match that would have hospitalized most species. Scritch was her favorite, though she kept that information out of official reports. He had this distinctive scale pattern along his spine that caught the light with an iridescent shimmer, and he possessed an insatiable curiosity about everything in his environment. Where Patches and Tiny were content to nap after feeding time, Scritch would investigate every corner of the habitat, testing boundaries, exploring new climbing routes, and generally acting like the overachieving student of apex predation. His curiosity metrics are 15% above cohort average, Cassidy noted, updating her datapad, and he's showing advanced problem-solving for his age group. Watch, he's figured out that the maintenance platform has better vantage points than the designated climbing structures. Yes, which is why we have reinforced the platform supports twice this month, Dr. Felmoss replied. The engineering team has filed complaints. Tell engineering to build sturdier platforms. I will tell engineering no such thing. The platforms are not designed for Ralth juvenile investigation. Through the observation glass, Scritch had indeed returned to his latest obsession. A maintenance platform that jutted into the habitat space, technically outside the designated boundaries, but close enough for a determined cub to reach. He'd been attempting to scale it for 3 days now, each time getting a bit higher before his caretakers lured him away with food or his siblings tackled him into a play session. Cassidy watched him carefully, tracking his movement patterns. Ralth cubs were surprisingly methodical when they wanted something. Scritch wasn't just randomly climbing. He was testing different approaches, learning which surfaces provided better grip, figuring out the optimal angle of approach. He's going to make it to the top eventually, she said, which is why we are scheduling habitat modifications for next week. You're crushing his dreams, Doc. I am preventing a juvenile apex predator from accessing station infrastructure. These are not equivalent concerns. The morning continued in comfortable routine. Cubs played, Cassidy took notes, Dr. Felmoss worried about everything, and the station hummed along with the steady rhythm of scientific research punctuated by minor chaos. That's when the platform groaned. It was a deep sound, metal under stress, the kind of noise that every instinct in Cassidy's body immediately flagged as wrong, Bad. Fix this now. Her head snapped toward the source. The maintenance platform, the one Scritch had been obsessing over, was tilting. That's not, she started. Warning, the station's AI interrupted in that serene, utterly unhelpful voice that all station AIs seem to possess. Structural failure detected in Biodome Section 12-C. Initiating emergency proto. The platform collapsed. Well, partially collapsed. The support beams buckled on one side, sending the entire structure listing at a dangerous angle, metal shrieking in protest. And there, clinging to what used to be a horizontal surface and was now decidedly vertical, was Scritch. The cub cried out, a high, distressed sound that pierced straight through the observation glass and into the part of Cassidy's brain that made terrible decisions. Emergency barriers deploying, the AI continued calmly. All personnel evacuate. Cassidy was moving before conscious thought caught up with her body. Cassidy! Dr. Felmoss's voice hit registers that probably counted as ultrasonic. The protocols! You cannot. The matriarch is in the adjacent habitat. The treaties. She heard him. Every word. The thing was, there was a kid clinging to collapsing metal, about to fall into a gap filled with jagged debris, and the emergency barriers were about to seal off the entire section, and everyone else on the observation deck was frozen in the kind of horrified paralysis that came from having excellent survival instincts and proper diplomatic training. Cassidy had neither. She had something arguably worse: the human inability to watch someone in trouble and not do something catastrophically stupid about it. Her hand slammed against the emergency access panel. Override, Behavioral Specialist Emergency Access, Authorization Cassidy 39 Delta. Access granted. Warning, entering active habitat zone without protective equipment is... She was through the airlock before the AI could finish listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The habitat air hit her like a wall. Hot, humid, thick with the scent of alien vegetation and Ralph territorial markers. Her boots hit rocky ground, and she was running, scrambling up the half-collapsed platform structure with all the grace of someone who'd spent more time in labs than obstacle courses. "Hold on!" she shouted, knowing Scritch couldn't understand a single word. "Just hold on, buddy." Behind the observation glass, she could peripherally see Dr. Felmoss's compound eyes expanded to maximum width, other staff members rushing about in what was probably blind panic, and someone, likely from the legal department, looking like they were about to faint. Cassidy reached the primary support beam just as it gave another ominous groan. Scritch was on the far side, on a crossbeam that was slowly sliding toward a gap that would drop him 6 meters onto rocks that even Ralph scales wouldn't enjoy meeting. There was no time for planning, no time for calling maintenance, no time for proper safety equipment or filing the appropriate emergency requests in triplicate. There was just a scared kid and collapsing metal, and the absolute certainty that standing there wasn't an option. Cassidy grabbed the support beam with both hands and pulled. It was obscenely heavy, the kind of heavy that made her shoulders immediately file complaints with her nervous system, the kind of heavy that suggested she'd severely miscalculated her upper body strength and possibly her life choices in general. "Move!" she yelled at Scritch, jerking her head toward safety. "Come on, go!" The cub stared at her with massive golden eyes, 3 of them, all dilated in fear and confusion. Then instinct kicked in, and he moved. Scritch lunged across the tilting platform, all 6 limbs scrambling, claws finding purchase on metal. He was fast, the kind of fast that reminded you that even as a cub, he was still an apex predator. And, for one glorious moment, Cassidy thought he'd clear the gap easily. That's when the beam shifted. The weight multiplied. Her boots slid on loose rock. Her shoulders screamed. Her grip started to slip. Scritch was almost there. Almost. His back leg caught on a piece of jutting metal, and he yanked free with the desperation of youth, and his claws, those absolutely gorgeous titanium-shredding claws, raked across Cassidy's forearms as he lunged past her to solid ground. The pain was immediate and informative. It informed her that she was bleeding. It informed her that Ralph's claws were even sharper than advertised. It informed her that she'd made a series of questionable life choices. But Scritch was safe. Cassidy released the beam and threw herself backward, hitting the ground as the entire platform structure completed its catastrophic collapse, with the sound of metal absolutely giving up on life. Something clipped her shoulder on the way down. A falling strut, maybe, or karma manifesting physically. And she felt something crunch in a way that shoulders definitely weren't designed to crunch. Then there was dust, ringing ears, the taste of copper, and the sudden realization that she was lying in an active Ralph habitat, bleeding from multiple wounds. "Cassidy!" Dr. Felmoss's voice crackled through her comm. "Medical is coming. Do not move. There is a matriarch approaching your—" "Ah, right. Scritch's mother." Through the settling dust, Cassidy saw her. Matriarch Ulse Pran, several 100 kilograms of apex predator moving with the fluid certainty of something that had never encountered a threat it couldn't handle. 3 meters of scales, muscle, and maternal instinct, heading directly toward the bleeding human who just made physical contact with her cub. Cassidy tried to stand, made it about 30% of the way up, and decided that sitting was actually a perfectly respectable position from which to face imminent death. Her arms were bleeding badly, warm and wet, and painting the rocks beneath her. Her shoulder was sending urgent notifications that she'd broken something important. But Scritch was huddled against a rock outcropping, shaking but whole. Worth it. Ulsapran's massive head swung from her cub to Cassidy, then back. Her tail lashed once, a movement that could have bisected a small vehicle. "So," Cassidy said, because apparently when faced with death by angry mother apex predator, humans just kept talking. The platform was definitely not up to code. "I'll be filing a complaint with engineering." "Well, probably not personally. Probably someone else will file it. On my behalf. Posthumously, maybe." The matriarch took another step, closer. Cassidy could see all 3 of her eyes now, golden and intense, focused on the strange, bleeding creature that had touched her baby. This was it. This was the diplomatic incident. This was how humanity accidentally triggered an interstellar crisis, because one behavioral specialist couldn't mind her own business. But Ulsapran didn't attack. She moved past Cassidy, close enough that the human could feel the heat radiating from her scales, close enough to count individual scale patterns, and went to Scritch. The matriarch ran her massive head along her cub's body with surprising gentleness, checking every centimeter for injury with the focused attention of any worried parent. Scritch chirped, pressing against his mother, and made a series of gestures with his head, back toward the collapsed platform, toward Cassidy, animated movements that clearly meant something in Ralph communication. Ulsapran went absolutely still. Then her head turned, all 3 eyes locking onto Cassidy again. The human did what any reasonable person would do, raised her bleeding arms in what she desperately hoped was a non-threatening gesture, and smiled weakly. "He's fine," she said. "That's what matters, right? Kid's okay. Mission accomplished." The airlock burst open. Medical personnel flooded in, along with security in full protective gear, and possibly someone from legal clutching a datapad like a shield. The observation deck had apparently emptied its entire population into the habitat in a controlled panic. Dr. Felmoss was chittering at frequencies that probably registered as pure distilled anxiety in Quilanthan. Someone was shouting about containment protocols. Someone else was yelling about treaty violations. The whole situation had the organized chaos of a plan that had gone spectacularly off-script and taken the script with it. The medical team surrounded Cassidy, scanners out, trying to assess her injuries, while also keeping very nervous eyes on the matriarch, who was still watching the whole scene unfold. Cassidy's vision was getting fuzzy around the edges, the blood loss and shock teaming up to suggest that consciousness was negotiable. The last thing she saw before the pain and exhaustion dragged her under was Olsapran, still as a statue, those golden eyes fixed on her with an expression that was utterly unreadable. Scritch pressed against his mother's side, chirping softly, gesturing toward the human who'd held up a platform to let him escape. And Cassidy thought, just before everything faded to black, well, at least the kid's okay. It was the most perfectly human thought possible, which meant it was completely missing the point of what was about to happen next. Waking up in a medical bay after doing something monumentally stupid had a particular quality to it. There was the slow return of consciousness, the inventory of body parts that hurt, all of them, the gradual realization that you were still alive, surprising, and then the dawning, awareness that you were going to have to explain yourself to people who had opinions about your life choices. Cassidy experienced all of these in rapid succession, followed by the bonus revelation that her room was surrounded by Ralph. Not attacking, not breaking things, just there, standing outside the transparent wall of her medical suite like the world's most terrifying honor guard. "Oh, good, you're awake," said a voice that Cassidy's pain-fogged brain eventually identified as belonging to Dr. Felmoss. I had prepared several speeches for various outcomes. This was my third favorite scenario. "What were the first two?" Cassidy croaked, her throat dry. "You waking up without Ralph guards outside your room, and you not waking up at all, so I wouldn't have to explain to Galactic Command how I lost a human to a diplomatic incident." "That's dark, Doc." "That is realistic." Dr. Felimoss moved into her field of vision, compound eyes scanning the medical readouts above her bed. "Your injuries were substantial, but not life-threatening. 14-centimeter claw lacerations on both forearms, dislocated shoulder, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion. You will recover fully, which is more than I can say for my career." Cassidy tried to sit up, immediately regretted it, and settled for turning her head to get a better look at the Ralph outside. There were 4 of them, all adults, all standing with that particular stillness that apex predators had mastered. The kind of stillness that suggested they could explode into violence at any moment, but were choosing not to. For now. "So they're not here to kill me?" "We are unsure why they are here at all. They arrived 6 hours ago and have refused to leave. Station security is having what I believe humans call a collective breakdown." "Where's Scritch? Is he okay?" "The juvenile is unharmed, thanks to your spectacular disregard for personal safety and interstellar law." Dr. Felmoss's antennae drooped. "Cassidy, do you understand what you have done? You made physical contact with a Ralph cub. You interfered with their young. There are 8,000 treaties specifically prohibiting this. There was a kid about to fall on jagged rocks. There was a Ralph juvenile in a situation that had proper emergency protocols. Which would have taken how long? 10 seconds? 20? That platform was coming down now, Doc. Right then. What was I supposed to do, Watch?" "Yes, Dr. Felmoss's voice climbed several octaves. You were supposed to watch. That is literally your job title. Behavioral observation requires observation, not participation. Well, I participated. How mad is everyone? On a scale of diplomatic incident to interstellar crisis, we are currently hovering around everyone is very confused and trying not to make it worse. That's when the Ralph guards moved. Not toward Cassidy. They stepped aside, forming a corridor, and through that corridor came Matriarch Ulysses Pran herself. She had to duck slightly to fit through the medical bay entrance, and her presence filled the room in a way that made Cassidy's hindbrain scream helpful suggestions about finding an exit. Dr. Felmoss made a sound that the translator gave up on entirely. Ulysses Pran approached the medical suite's transparent wall, all three eyes focusing on Cassidy with an intensity that felt physical. Up close, the matriarch was even more impressive. Scales that shifted between deep emerald and midnight blue, musculature that suggested she could shred the medical bay without breaking stride, and an aura of absolute authority that made it clear why Ryalth were at the top of every food chain they'd ever encountered. Behind her, moving with more caution, came Scritch. The cub looked healthy, uninjured, and utterly fascinated by the medical equipment. He chirped at his mother, then at Cassidy, then back at his mother in what was clearly some kind of communication. Ulysses Pran rumbled, a deep sound that Cassidy felt in her chest, and the translator on the wall flickered to life. You, the matriarch said, her voice rendered in galactic standard, but carrying undertones the translator couldn't quite capture. Human, you touched my cub. I'm really sorry about that, Cassidy said, because when facing an apex predator, honesty seemed like the best policy. The platform was collapsing, and he was going to fall, and I just— You held the beam, Ulysses Pran interrupted. You held the weight while he escaped. Your blood marked the stones. I saw this. Yeah, well, he's just a kid. Couldn't let a kid get hurt. The matriarch's head tilted slightly, a gesture that Scritch had clearly inherited. Just a kid, she repeated, as if testing the words. You risked death for just a kid? It wasn't that dramatic. I mean, it felt dramatic at the time, but Ulysses Pran made a sound that the translator rendered as something between a growl and a laugh. Human, show me your arms. Cassidy glanced at Dr. Felmoss, who looked like he'd achieved a new level of anxiety previously unknown to his species. When no one stopped her, she slowly raised her bandaged forearms. The matriarch leaned closer to the transparent barrier, examining the dressings that covered the claw marks. Her expression, if Cassidy was reading it right, which was a big if, seemed almost reverent. In Ralph culture, Ulysses Pran said slowly, scars earned protecting our young are called marks of the worthy. They are the highest honor a warrior can receive. Only the bravest among us carry such marks. They are celebrated, remembered, honored across generations. Cassidy blinked. Oh, that's actually really beautiful. You, human, have earned marks of the worthy. You, who are not Ryalth. You, who are small and soft, and should not have survived contact with my son's claws. You held a beam that would crush most species, bled upon stones to save one who is not your kind. And you call this just a kid. I mean, he is just a kid, though. The matriarch's tail swished once, a gesture that Cassidy was starting to recognize as amusement. The galaxy believes humans are reckless, impulsive, foolish in their bravery. They are not wrong, but they miss the important part. What's the important part? You do not calculate worth before action. You see need, and you move. This is not foolishness. This is honor. Olsopron straightened to her full height. I declare before witnesses, life debt. The matriarch Olsopron of the Western Range owes Cassidy of humanity a debt of blood and protection. This debt extends to her family, her pack, her people. This is our way. Dr. Felmoss made a wheezing sound. I'm sorry, Cassidy said. Did you just say life debt? You saved my cub. I owe you a life. This is not negotiable. But I was just doing what anyone would do? Olspran's 3 eyes gleamed. No, human. You did what no one else would do. You did what only one species in this galaxy is foolish and brave enough to attempt. You did what makes you worthy. Scritch chirped and pressed against his mother's leg, looking at Cassidy with what she could only describe as adoration. Oh, Cassidy said faintly. Oh, this is going to be a whole thing, isn't it? Dr. Felmoss buried his face in his primary manipulators. You have no idea. News traveled fast in the galactic community, but news about humans doing something inexplicable traveled at speeds that violated several laws of physics and possibly common sense. Within 8 hours of Olsespran's declaration, Frontier's Edge had gone from a quiet research outpost to the most diplomatically significant location in 3 sectors. Within 16 hours, Cassidy's accidental act of heroism had been analyzed, debated, and memed across 73 different species communication networks. The general consensus was, humans did a human thing again, and somehow it worked out, and we're all very tired. Cassidy was released from medical after 2 days, with strict instructions to take it easy, avoid strenuous activity, and definitely not do anything else that would require diplomatic intervention. She nodded along to all of this, while privately thinking that taking it easy sounded boring, and she had cubs to observe. What she didn't expect was the cubs observing her right back. So this is normal now? Cassidy asked, gesturing at the 3 Rolth juveniles who had somehow ended up following her through the station corridors. Define normal, Dr. Felmoss replied, walking slightly behind her with the air of someone who'd given up on controlling the situation and was just documenting it for posterity. If by normal you mean unprecedented in all of Ralth galactic relations, then yes, perfectly normal. Scritch was at her right side, matching her pace with the kind of attention usually reserved for pack bonding behavior. Patches and Tiny flanked her left, occasionally bumping into each other as they competed for proximity. Station personnel were pressing themselves against walls to let the procession pass, staring with expressions that ranged from awe to terror to, I'm not paid enough for this. They're supposed to be in their habitat, Cassidy pointed out. Yes, well, Matriarch Olspran has decided that her cubs should spend time with you, as part of their education, about worthiness and honor and other concepts that are giving our diplomatic staff migraine equivalents. I'm just going to the observation deck to do my actual job. You are being followed by 3 apex predator juveniles through a multi-species research station. Your actual job has evolved. This was true. What had started as Cassidy's regular duties had transformed into something the station administration was tentatively calling cultural exchange liaison work, because they needed to call it something on the official reports, and human accidentally becomes Ralth ambassador through sheer stubborn kindness was too long for the forms. Other species watched this development with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching someone juggle live explosives while standing on a tightrope. The Ralth, the galaxy's most dangerous apex predators, the species with more do not disturb treaties than some planets had moons, were treating a human like an honored warrior. Their juveniles followed her around. Their matriarch had declared a life debt. It was the kind of thing that made xenobiologists reconsider their entire understanding of interspecies relations. "Has anyone figured out how to explain this to Galactic Command?" Cassidy asked. "The current report is 80 pages long and uses the phrase human instinct override 6 times. I don't think they understand it any better than we do." Cassidy reached the observation deck, and the cubs immediately spread out, investigating the space with their characteristic curiosity. Scritch found a chair and attempted to sit in it, discovered that Ralth anatomy was not designed for furniture, and settled for lying next to it instead, while looking pleased with himself. "This is my life now," Cassidy muttered. "This is everyone's life now," Dr. Felmos corrected. "You have fundamentally altered Ralth-galactic relations by being aggressively helpful. The diplomatic corps is still processing." A message notification pinged on Cassidy's datapad. She glanced at it, then read it again more carefully, then looked at Dr. Felmos with an expression he'd learned to recognize as, "The human is about to make my job more complicated." "What is it?" he asked with deep resignation. "Matriarch Olspran has invited me to the Ralth homeworld for a formal ceremony. Something about officially recognizing my marks of the worthy in front of the clans." "Of course she has. It says I'm expected to participate in traditional honor customs." "Of course you are." "Doc, I don't know anything about Ralth traditions." "No one does. They're notoriously private about their cultural practices. You'll be one of the first non-Ralth to witness their ceremonies." Dr. Felmos's antennae twitched rapidly. "You're going to accept, aren't you?" Cassidy looked at Scritch, who was watching her with those huge golden eyes, tail swishing contentedly. She thought about the moment on the collapsing platform, the weight of the beam, the certainty that letting a kid get hurt wasn't an option. She thought about how none of this had been calculated, just necessary. "Yeah," she said, "I'm going to accept. You're going to give me a stress disorder." "You already have anxiety, Doc. I'm just keeping it company." Scritch chirped happily, and Cassidy couldn't help but smile. She had no idea what Ralth ceremonies involved, no idea what traditional honor customs meant, no idea how she'd ended up as an accidental cultural bridge between humans and the galaxy's apex predators. But she'd figure it out. That's what humans did. They figured it out, usually at the last minute, often with questionable planning, and somehow, impossibly, inexplicably, they made it work. The galaxy found this infuriating. Cassidy found it perfectly reasonable. After all, how complicated could one ceremony be? The answer to "how complicated could one ceremony be" turned out to be extraordinarily complicated, actually, and also slightly terrifying. The Ralth homeworld was called Ralthax, which translated roughly to "the place where strength is born," or possibly "the place where soft species go to realize they should have stayed home." The planet was a composition of extreme environments: volcanic mountain ranges, dense jungles that looked actively hostile, and massive sprawling territories that the various Ralth clans controlled with the kind of territorial intensity that made border disputes look like friendly suggestions. Cassidy arrived via diplomatic transport, accompanied by Dr. Felmos, who'd insisted on coming because someone needs to document your inevitable diplomatic incident, and a small security detail who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. The landing site was in the Western Range territory, Matriarch Olspran's domain. As the transport descended, Cassidy could see Ralth moving through the landscape below. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, gathering for what she'd been told was a significant cultural event. "Why do I feel like I'm about to be the main course at a very formal dinner?" Cassidy muttered. Because your survival instincts are finally developing, Dr. Felmoss replied, approximately 6 months too late, but better than never. The ceremony site was a massive natural amphitheater carved into volcanic rock, terraced levels rising in concentric circles around a central platform. Rialth filled the spaces, their scales creating a living tapestry of colors: emerald, sapphire, deep crimson, midnight black. The sight of hundreds of apex predators in one place was the kind of thing that made Cassidy's hindbrain suggest that running away was a valid life choice. Matriarch Olsopron met them at the entrance, along with Scritch, who immediately bounded over to Cassidy and made happy chirping sounds while trying not to accidentally knock her over with enthusiasm. "Easy, buddy," Cassidy laughed, steadying herself. "I'm still healing, remember?" "He has not stopped talking about you since you left the station," Olsopron said, her translated voice carrying warmth. "He tells everyone about the human who held the sky to save him." "I held a beam, not the sky." "To a cub, there is no difference." The matriarch gestured toward the amphitheater. "Come. The clans have gathered to witness." What followed was unlike anything Cassidy had experienced. She was led to the central platform, where Elder Ralph, their scales bearing the patina of age and countless scars, sat in positions of honor. Olsopron began speaking in the Ralph language, her voice carrying across the amphitheater without need for amplification. The translator in Cassidy's ear rendered the speech. "We gather to honor one who is not Rialth, but who has earned Rialth honor. One who bled protecting our young. One who carries marks of the worthy." The assembled Rialth responded with a rumbling sound that Cassidy felt in her chest, a vocalization that seemed to resonate through the volcanic stone itself. Warriors stepped forward, one by one, displaying their own scars. Each told a story: battles fought, cubs protected, dangers faced. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, this display of survival and sacrifice. And then Olsopron gestured to Cassidy. "Share your battle," the matriarch said simply. Cassidy stood there, hundreds of golden eyes watching her, and tried to figure out how to explain that she hadn't fought a battle. She'd just done what needed doing. "There was a cub in danger," she began, her voice amplified by the natural acoustics. "A platform was collapsing. I couldn't reach him in time to pull him to safety, so I held the structure. Long enough for him to escape. That's all it was. Just keeping a kid from getting hurt." The amphitheater was silent. Then one of the elders spoke, his voice rough with age. "Just keeping a kid from getting hurt." She says this as if it is simple, as if the weight did not threaten to crush her, as if the pain did not matter, as if survival was not uncertain. "She did not think," another elder added. "She moved. Need existed. And she answered. This is the oldest form of honor." Cassidy felt her face flush. "I'm really not trying to make this sound more dramatic than it was." That's when War Chief Grendak stepped forward. He was massive, even for a Ralph, his scales a deep crimson marked with silver scars. His presence carried the weight of authority and challenge in equal measure. "The human speaks of this act as if it is nothing," Grendak said, his voice carrying clearly. "Perhaps because to humans it is nothing. Perhaps they claim honor too easily. Perhaps this one does not truly understand what she has been given." The atmosphere shifted. Cassidy could feel the tension ripple through the assembled Rialth. Olsopron's tail lashed once. "You challenge the worthiness of my declaration, Grendak?" "I challenge nothing that is proven," the war chief replied. "But is it proven?" Has this human demonstrated true understanding of what it means to carry marks of the worthy? Or has she simply been lucky, and we mistake luck for honor? What are you suggesting? Olsopran's voice had dropped to a dangerous register. The traditional test. The hollow of echoes. If she faces what waits in that place and emerges, then no one can question her worthiness. If she refuses— Grendak's three eyes fixed on Cassidy. Then perhaps the marks she carries are merely scars, nothing more. Dr. Felmoss made a strangled sound through the calm. Cassidy, you don't have to— What's the hollow of echoes? Cassidy asked. Olsopran turned to her. It is a sacred place, a cavern where natural compounds in the air create visions. Warriors go there to face their fears, to prove their courage. It is not a physical battle. It is a battle of will and spirit. Many Ralth have entered and not emerged for days, their minds trapped in their own terrors. And if I do this, everyone accepts that I earned these marks? If you do this, Grendak said, I will personally declare your honor before all clans. You will be recognized as worthy not just by one matriarch, but by our people. Cassidy looked at her bandaged forearms, at Scritch, who was watching her with worried eyes, at the assembled Ralth waiting for her answer. She thought about the platform, the weight, the absolute certainty in that moment that letting a kid get hurt wasn't acceptable. She thought about how none of that had been about seeking honor or recognition. It had just been about doing what was right. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Dr. Felmoss's anguished chittering was probably audible from space. The Hollow of Echoes was a cave system in the volcanic mountains, its entrance marked with carved Ralth symbols. Cassidy entered alone, as tradition demanded, while the clans waited outside. The air inside was thick, carrying a sweet, almost intoxicating scent. Within minutes, Cassidy felt the effects. Reality became fluid, time stretched and compressed, and her fears manifested with vivid clarity. She saw herself failing, saw Scritch falling, the platform crushing him, heard the cub's cries, saw herself frozen, useless, watching others suffer while she did nothing, saw every moment of doubt, every fear of inadequacy, every worry that she wasn't enough, wasn't capable, wasn't worthy of the trust others placed in her. The visions were relentless, pulling at her mind, trying to convince her that her worst fears were truth. But then the perspective shifted. She saw the moment, on the platform again, but through Scritch's eyes. Saw herself from his viewpoint, this strange, small creature that had run toward danger instead of away from it. Saw her own face, determined and scared, but moving anyway. Felt the cub's terror transform into hope as the weight lifted, as escape became possible. Saw the moment after, through Olsopran's eyes. The matriarch watching a human, bleeding and broken, smiling weakly and saying, "He's okay. That's what matters." Cassidy understood then. The Ralth didn't honor her because she'd been strong enough, or brave enough, or special enough. They honored her because, when faced with a choice between safety and action, she'd chosen action. Not because she was fearless, the visions had proven she was full of fear, but because she'd acted despite the fear. That was the point. That had always been the point. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward when every instinct screamed to stop. Cassidy walked through the visions, acknowledging them, accepting them, and continuing forward. The cave system twisted and turned, reality bleeding at the edges, but she kept moving. One step, then another, then another. Dawn was breaking when she emerged from the Hollow of Echoes. The assembled Ralth were waiting, silent. Cassidy was exhausted, probably still slightly affected by the hallucinogens and definitely needed to sit down soon. Grendak approached, studied her for a long moment, then lowered his massive head in a gesture of respect. "She emerges," he announced to the clans. "The human has faced the hollow and walked free. I declare her worthy before all who witness. Let no one question the honor of these marks." The Ralth responded with that deep, resonant vocalization. Acceptance and recognition rolled into sound. Olspron stepped forward, carrying something woven from shed Ralth scales. A band, intricate and beautiful, traditional honorwear of legendary protectors. She placed it carefully on Cassidy's wrist, just above the bandages. "Scar-bearer of the small," the matriarch said formally. "You are recognized. You are honored. You are one of us in spirit, if not in form." Scritch bounded forward, chirping excitedly, and Cassidy couldn't help but laugh. Exhausted, slightly hysterical laughter that probably wasn't dignified but felt absolutely necessary. "So," she said to Dr. Felmos through the comm, "how's that documentation coming along?" "I have resigned myself to the fact that wherever you go, history follows," he replied. "Also, you're trending on 68 different planetary networks. The humans are very proud. Everyone else is confused and slightly concerned." "That sounds about right." The ceremony concluded with a feast, with warrior songs, with cubs playing at Cassidy's feet, while adults shared stories of their own trials. The galaxy would spend months analyzing this moment, trying to understand how one human had accidentally bridged a gap that had existed since first contact. But standing there, wearing honor scales on her wrist, surrounded by apex predators who'd accepted her not despite being human, but because of what being human meant. The impulsive kindness, the stubborn courage, the refusal to calculate worth before action, Cassidy understood something the analysts would miss. Humans didn't become heroes by trying. They became heroes by simply refusing to look away when someone needed help. It was that simple. It was that complicated. It was, as the Ralth would say, worthy. And as Scritch settled beside her, his massive head resting against her leg while she absently scratched behind his auditory ridges, Cassidy thought that maybe, just maybe, accidentally becoming a legend wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Even if it did give her supervisor chronic anxiety. Especially if it meant kids, any species, were a little bit safer. That, she decided, was worth every scar.